someone says there's a monster under my bed, until I see that snarling face with the gory teeth, I have no reason to divert limited resources for that. But if you find out and you want to let us know, that's fine. But so far, it just hasn't happened. That there's been no West Virginia snake handler saying, "Glory be, I got through and I'm going to wreck these people." So I really don't know what to say about that.
Okay, thank you. Do you find that the rising tide of support for libertarianism in your country will have any significant impact on support for secular government amongst the American and the right wing?
That's a very good question. And the question is whether the Libertarian Party, which is right-wing on economic issues, but disfavors the religious right, will be able to mount a counter-challenge to the religious right in the Republican Party, and the answer is not yet. What has happened is that though some libertarians vote for their Libertarian Party nominee, the majority of libertarians, because of the issues of the economy and gun ownership questions, do more often than not vote for the Republican nominee for president, though they disapprove of the religious message.
What about candidates such as like Ron Paul or Jesse Ventura?
Okay, Jesse Ventura would be a good example. Ron Paul is a Christian right-winger.
Yes, and he's also said he doesn't believe in evolution, which is pretty ridiculous. Right. But nonetheless, in his rhetoric, seems to be in greater support of separation of church and state.
No. He refers to America as a Christian nation. And so he is rare. Well, first of all, he's a registered Republican. Yeah. But he is rare among libertarian-leaning people. See, first of all, if he were a true libertarian and didn't sympathize with the religious right, he'd probably re-register as a libertarian, since he claims not to care what people think. But if you hear his rhetoric and you hear what he says about religion and government, he is with the religious right. People believe that because he was the only Republican candidate to oppose the war in Iraq, that he is not a religious right-winger. The two don't go together.
See, I've actually watched quite a few of his speeches. I found that usually when he was asked questions related to faith, he tended to back down.
Well, but not on his website and not on his prior statements.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, he is on record.
Well, I'm a much bigger fan of Ventura. I really like to see him.
Yeah, but he dropped out. He dropped out.
He might be running for the Minnesota Senate this
Maybe so. But right now, well, if we're looking for libertarian-minded people who have the courage to separate church and state, Ron Paul is not in that group. Ventura would be.
Fair enough. One other quick question. Your country was founded on, obviously a noble tradition, Jefferson, Madison, separation of church and state, more or less cemented in stone, whereas we things a little different here. Kind of gained autonomy in a limited sense originally in the 1860s with not really freedoms guaranteed in the same kind of respect. Why do you suppose over the course of history your country has developed into such a hotbed of fundamentalism, whereas ours, we have our problems, don't get me wrong, but has, in comparative terms, not been quite the same?
It's an excellent question. What happened is that Jefferson's optimistic prediction didn't come true. In 1823, Jefferson, as retired third president of the U.S., wrote to John Adams, the retired second president, and said he predicts that in a few decades, most Americans would be Unitarians. What Jefferson didn't foresee was the revivalism that swept the country, and what nobody could foresee then was the Civil War starting in 1861, where upon defeat, the South, in order to try to preserve some sense of their own regional identity and power, turned to religion. A lot of the fundamentalism was a reaction of the defeated South. So when you had the revivalism in the North and the creation of the South's own brand of baptism, the Southern Baptists, you have both regions of the country through different paths coming to a fundamentalist state. Now, what is curious, and I don't know the full reason for it, is that the United States has always been on a twin track of simplistic religious thinking and yet advanced scientific technology. But the disdain for intellectuals is much stronger in the United States than it is here. In this sense, Canada is more like Europe, in that intellectual depth is not an automatic death knell for a would-be candidate. In 1952, when General Eisenhower defeated Democratic nominee Adlai Stevenson for president and defeated him again in 1956, the main outcry against Stevenson was he was an intellectual, an egghead. Even former President Harry Truman said that, who was supporting Stevenson, said the problem was Eisenhower spoke to farmers, Stevenson spoke to college presidents, and farmers outnumbered college presidents by the millions. So there has simply been a strain of anti-intellectualism that has pervaded the United States, and Canada, to a large degree, has, I think, been culturally, not legally, but culturally more tied to European Enlightenment principles. And so we're not talking about what the laws say, we're talking about what the culture, there is a kind of European Enlightenment culture that I think thrives in this country more than the United States, and where perhaps depth of intellect might be valued a little bit more by the average Canadian voter than by the average American voter. I mean, I can't see a candidate for high office in this country being vilified as being too intellectual. Maybe I'm wrong.
How it happens.
And if he or she is vilified, maybe not to the degree as in the United States.
All right, thanks.
I enjoyed your talk. It's always fun to hear the American perspective. To those of us who no longer live in the United States, it's often puzzling, this emphasis on legality and constitution and Supreme Court. One justice could overthrow everything else. Of course, most of those problems wouldn't exist if American society could be changed. Got any ideas on how to solve the problem rather than just defend against it?
It would take a massive education program that would probably take a century to wean the bulk of the American people, not even so much away from religion, but from the notion that religion is ripe for imposition on their neighbor through force of law. But until that happens, we need a Supreme Court in place that sits on the majoritarian tendencies and doesn't let it out of the cage, as we've done for 61 years. But certainly, I think that we need a cultural revival in the United States that reveres science, reason, and intellectual exploration. We need a sort of American Enlightenment renaissance. And we also, I think, for those of us who are non-believers, have to sow enough seeds of doubt about claims of the supernatural so that even if people don't give up those beliefs, that they are uncertain enough regarding those beliefs that they're not going to be that willing to impose a religious view on a neighbor. In the year 2000, on the March 2000 ballot, a statewide ballot in California, two bad things happened. The first, I was defeated for the state assembly. The second was the voters approved by 61.5% the ban on same-sex marriage, but approved it as a statute, not as a constitutional amendment, so our Supreme Court could strike it down. Now it appears that the opposition to same-sex marriage has gone down to 50%. The question really comes down to, when will the average American voter see a difference between personal religious belief and what the law of the land should be? And I think that will be a massive, decades-long educational process.
That does not sound very optimistic.
Well, I'm a realist.
Yeah.
I'm not an optimist or a pessimist, I'm a realist.
So you foresee a time in the future when the difference between Europe and Canada and the United States is even more extreme than it is now?
I don't know. I do know this. If we lose the Supreme Court now, and the currently festering religious fervor in the United States is legally unleashed for the first time in 61 years, we're going backwards.
Two quick questions. The first one is that the United States president is supposed to be an ordinary man with, in an extraordinary situation, but we know that's not true because, with his veto, by that I mean that the Congress could put through their will with a 66% over presidential veto override. But as Cheney said, well, who controls the helicopters, right? We control the helicopters. So, if the Congress is not convened, lots of things can happen. And Roosevelt took very so-called pocket vetoes, took very, like 1,000 or so pocket vetoes from Roosevelt. So now let's say in a situation when, and even Goethe, when he applied for his American citizenship, he was very saddened because he said, well, I studied this document and it seems to me when Congress is not reconvened, the United States president could actually technically install a dictatorship. And the citizenship judge wasn't very pleased with that answer, saying that, well, Hitler could have an easy way with the US Constitution to install a dictatorship. So my question to you is, now you mentioned that, okay, a president could lock in the Supreme Court in an unfavorable position for the secularist cause, but for about, let's say, 30, 40 years. But what happens if the liberal president gets elected and when the Supreme Court is not in session? Is there some kind of a Congress not in session equivalent of the Supreme Court not in session?
No. The only thing that can happen is that the president, when the Senate is not in session, can make what's known as a midnight appointment and can temporarily fill a vacancy. And President Bush invoked this on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal governing Florida and Georgia. And what happened was William Pryor, who was the arch right-wing Attorney General of Alabama, was put on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal during what was called a recess appointment. The only thing is, the president still had the Senate and they later ratified it. But on a Supreme Court nomination, there would be an outcry if the president bypassed the Senate's advice and consent. So I don't think anything could be snuck past on this. I don't see a provision, and I think even...
Yeah, but they have to convene, they have to have a court decorum, and as Cheney says, well, who controls the helicopter? So if these people cannot get together in one decorum...
Well, yes, but whoever controls the helicopter still cannot put someone in the Supreme Court without Senate ratification. Therefore, in the United States, what we urge people is equally important with the presidential election is the United States Senate election, and we ask people to always ask their Senate candidates their views on religious right-wing judges, because in 1987, when Ronald Reagan tried to put Robert Bork on the Supreme Court, the nomination was rejected. Same with Nixon in 1971 with Haynesworth and Carswell. So even though it happens rarely, when there is a sufficient majority of civil libertarians in the US Senate, it's happened at least 3 times in the past 40 years that an extreme nominee to the court has been turned down. Now in Bork's case, The Senate Judiciary Committee rejected him, but it was still brought to the floor of the Senate. And now, of course, Bork was even more extreme. Bork believes that Congress should be able to overrule Supreme Court opinions, which means that there would no longer be protection of minority rights because a majority legislature could overturn the court. And Bork has turned out to be the worst of religious right-wingers, as we thought even then back in '87. But the sneaking in through the cracks of Supreme Court justices, that's the one thing that an army of helicopters won't achieve.
Oh, and my second advice is, I say, forget these ad hoc meetings with other multicultural groups. Usually, the best way is just ask for your deposit. You know, you pay a tuition fee, and if a university suspends a university for Yom Kippur, for example, well, just say, hey, I lost 2 hours of courses. Please give me the equivalent.
Well, but you see, in terms of a strategy to get many Canadians to oppose special privileges for the religious, you need to work with as many religions as feel that this is not a good idea. There are, you see, I always say that...
but usually what happens is the Kurds will get their Kurdish New Year, the Chinese their Chinese New Year breaks, and the Jews their Yom Kippur breaks. So it usually tends to go the other way around.
But let's try it. We've nothing to lose by it. I mean, you can demand your deposit back and try it. What I'm saying is that there's strength in numbers. And to the extent, for instance, let's say that the province of Ontario wanted to create official Sharia courts for Muslims. Well, certainly an ad hoc coalition of secular humanists and Christians might be what, and Jews might be what it takes to defeat that.
Oh, no, the Jews, they already had it, and they were for Sharia courts, because with losing the Sharia courts, they lost their Jewish courts.
Right, but I think there will be enough people. What I'm saying is that on these delicate issues, if a coalition would work, I'm only thinking in terms
And
of
I'm pretty
strategy.
sure the Archbishop of Canterbury, he was in favor of Sharia law,
Yes.
because he wanted for the Anglican Christian courts for his...
That's why before you form the coalition, you explore their position. What I'm saying is if you find allies on these issues, you don't turn down working with them just because they are believers. But you explore it first. Sir, are you from Hungary?
I'm a Hungarian, but from Romania.
Because my mother was from Hungary, and I detected the accent, so
Yeah,
hogy
that's
vagy,
it.
and
Yeah,
jó
that's
estét
it.
kívánok.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, thank you for your attendance. I think we'll wrap things up. Thank you for enlightening discussion. So just a quick reminder, next big lecture is going to be in 2 weeks with John Novak on appreciating the human perspective. You can get more information in those newsletters that I mentioned. And if you are interested in the internship, talk to me. If you're thirsty, there's drinks at the back. Other than that, have a great evening. Thank you.